Hello everyone, I'm Captain Logan, and it's not Spawn year. It's day 34 of my comic review video day calendar, and this time we're going to go to 1977 and take a look at our first issue this year of Amazing Spider-Man. Probably won't be our last. This one is issue 169. This is pretty early in the Len Wein run, and this one is drawn by Ross Andru, who had a pretty lengthy stint on this book. I think he drew 50 issues or so. He goes back to the late 50s. He did a lot of stuff for DC. He drew some real early Wonder Woman, did some Superman, and that is not a name that comes up as often as it ought to, but the place I most hear that name is with regards to the famous Superman and Spider-Man crossover, which I really wish I had a copy of. That is not the cheapest thing to get your hands on now, of course, but that's one of my grails. That's a thing I'd like to get at some point. I'm not even sure what that book's for right now. But anyway, he drew quite a bit with during Jerry Conway's run, and famously drew the first appearance of Punisher, 129, which I have a copy of, and I think I've reviewed that before, so that'd be the only reason that won't show up this year. Maybe I'll revisit it and take a look at that again. I've not decided yet. The reason I decided to go to this one today is kind of silly, kind of amusing. This is an issue that I used to have at least 50 of in my possession, if not 100, back in my eBay days, back in my retail days. I used to sell, as I've talked about before, a lot of comics online, and a little while back I had a flea market booth. And at one time, I bought out a collection that had a bunch of the same issue for 2 or 3 comics. I had a bunch of duplicates. One of them was 169. I just saw this cover over and over and over again. And I think I owned this already, and as I was looking at my copy, I was thinking, oh, I should have actually traded this out for one of the others, because it's got kind of a nick in the corner here. It's in okay shape. It's, more than readable, and it's real well intact, but I think I probably had a few that looked even nicer than this one at one time. I've done that a few times. And then there was also a Hulk issue, I remember, that I had a bazillion of. So anyway, I thought it was time that I finally read this issue, since I sold it a bunch of times. And this is kind of a transition sort of issue, where it's setting up a mystery. It's building on a threat that's been going on with Jonah Jameson and the Spider Slayers. It looks like Len Wein is doing kind of a slow burn into something bigger and more epic, and it's a fine issue, but it doesn't stand great all by itself, so I'll tell you what's in here, but it's not quite as exciting as the cover would lead you to believe. This cover is a little bit like the Daredevil issue I did the other day, where I forget what number that was. 57, was it? Late 50s in the numbering. And that was the issue where Karen Page finds out that Matt Murdock is Daredevil. And it was not false advertising, and was exactly as advertised when you get to the end of that issue. And it was kind of funny because it doesn't happen early. It's right at the very, very end, so it just spoils that last page. This is the opposite of that. This is what I was a little bit concerned that issue might be, because I wasn't sure when Karen Page finds out that Matt Murdock is Daredevil, so I didn't know if it actually happened there or not. This suggests that Jameson is actually going to find out Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and then it's going to massively change the status quo, and it's a little, to use a modern term, clickbaity. Jameson indeed does use pictures that look like this, although weirdly, it's not exactly these photos, and he tries to prove that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, or rather that Peter Parker is, he believes, not Peter Parker and just masquerading as Peter Parker and is actually whoever Spider-Man really is. And we'll get to that scene in a little bit because it's earlier in the issue than you would expect. Looking at the cover, it happens about a third of the way through, and then we're finished with that. Jameson is real desperate because his last attempt at grabbing Spider-Man with the Spider Slayers was unsuccessful, and he's afraid to try that again because his reputation is kind of tarnished over that, and he's been using Spider Slayers for a while. I don't know if this is the first time that the public has found out that he's connected to them, but I didn't think it was. It's just been a while since I read the real early Spider Slayer stuff. So anyway, let's go ahead and get into this. So Confrontation is the name of the issue because he's going to have a confrontation with Jonah Jameson that's going to last 2 pages and is not ultimately going to be very consequential. I want to talk for just a second about Andrew's art here. This is the most Ditko-esque that I think anybody really gets after Ditko. And he's like a little bit more muscular than Ditko draws him, but the way he frames Spider-Man's body, the way he contorts sometimes, just the angles he uses, the outlining even, it's a lot like the way Ditko drew it. And this would have felt at the time to be kind of almost, I don't want to say throwback, but just still classic Spider-Man. We haven't gotten too far away from what it is at its inception, and I like this art a lot. I wish he was talked about and praised more than he is, because I think Andrew does a fabulous job, and I like his human faces maybe a little bit less than I like his costume stuff. I will say that. But I just really love how, in the tradition of Stan Lee and Ditko, this book still is all the way into 1977, into issue 169. We have already had the original Clone Saga at this point, or at least there's been some stuff with clones, because that's referenced here, and it kind of tells you around the time period that we're here. That's just happened, and that's in fact how Jameson is going to try to pull the wool over the eyes of, or I shouldn't say it that way, but how he's going to blindside and surprise Peter Parker, who he again thinks is not Peter Parker. So we'll get to that in a second. There's one page, I guess just this one page where Harry Osborn shows up. We kind of touch base with him just to see how he's doing. He's real happy, which makes you think that the other shoe is going to drop pretty soon. This isn't just a throwaway scene or like put a pin in it, though, because it is significant because of the way Peter is kind of throwing Harry under the bus when we get to the Jameson scene. So I kind of like that that's here and that we see him for a second and that he's in a real happy place in his life. He's going to therapy. This is his therapist here. He's dating Liz Allen. They're getting along real well. They're just going to dinner here. There's this kind of awkward moment where his therapist kind of makes googly eyes at Liz Allen and is kind of overly enamored with her. He's like, oh, an attractive woman. And then he goes, good for them. That's kind of funny, because for a second I thought that was maybe going someplace else. And then Jameson, just in a real surprise, out of nowhere scene, again, I mean, it's set up earlier because Jameson is talking with whoever the woman is that's working with the Spider Slayers. I did not recognize her. I don't know who that is. I don't know if that was like a scientist woman who's building the Spider Slayers. I don't know why she's okay with Jameson taking the law into his own hands, trying to go after Spider-Man. But that lady was working with him, and then he's like, well, I've got this other thing, this other trick up my sleeve. I've been waiting to use this. It's kind of my secret weapon in case my other plans fail at capturing Spider-Man. So again, he's kind of desperate. He goes to Peter's apartment and he says, I know that you're not actually Peter Parker, and I have the pictures to prove it. Like he says on the cover, real expressive, kind of dynamic panels here where you've got these constant like jagged red shapes behind both of these guys' head to denote that they're really angry and heated and freaking out at each other. And you've got this amusing moment where Jameson grabs Peter's face and says, "I'm looking for seams. I know you've got to be wearing a mask." And before I know exactly what he's thinking and what he's up to here, I'm like, okay, because I could see Stan Lee writing this. And again, this is not a Stan Lee issue, but this is the kind of stuff that you sometimes got in the earliest issues of Spider-Man. Is Jameson thinking that Spider-Man is wearing a Peter Parker mask, and that when he opens Peter Parker's face, he's going to see Spider-Man wearing his Spider-Man mask? And I really thought maybe that's where he was going with this. What it actually is, and maybe he is thinking that, what it actually is he thinks that whoever Spider-Man really is, he's masquerading as Peter Parker because he has pictures that prove he thinks that Spider-Man got rid of the dead body of Peter Parker wearing a Spider-Man costume. Now, keep in mind, he doesn't get into at all any speculation why he might think that Peter Parker was wearing a Spider-Man costume if he's not Spider-Man. There's just a character in a Spider-Man costume next to Peter Parker. It's like I could see him. I guess he wouldn't draw the conclusion that dead Peter Parker is Spider-Man because Spider-Man is still out there doing things, but it is kind of weird that he jumps to this conclusion where, well, I guess it's not weird. It's Jameson. He's going to assume that anything that seems terrible that Spider-Man is doing must be actually real and awful. But anytime this kind of thing happens, I'm always thinking, I mean, it covers your whole body. It would be really easy for anybody to put on a Spider-Man costume and go do a terrible thing and try to frame Spider-Man. But Jameson wouldn't care about that, even if it was a frame-up job, because he can get what he wants, which is to get rid of Spider-Man, get Spider-Man taken in by the authorities. And so he shows Peter these pictures and goes, "Ha, I got you. You are Spider-Man. Peter Parker is dead, and you're pretending to be him." And Peter has been waiting for this. He knows that Jameson has these pictures, and again, those pictures are actually about the whole clone situation. And we get a footnote about that. Len Wein says, actually, it was only the Jackal's clone of Pete, as anyone who's read issue 151 already knows. And so there's some nice continuity here, going all the way back, 15 issues. And he's been sitting on this for a while, and Peter has what the issue presents as a really good ironclad argument. So he's done this double exposure thing to make it look like, and it's kind of a little grim, honestly, a little macabre, where he's done a double exposure thing and taken the face of the dead clone and put it on somebody lying next to a woman sunbathing. Like that just seems a little bit messed up to me, but that's what he did to try to show that to Jameson as proof that he's wrong. And Jameson says, well, that's an easy forgery. And of course, this is before photoshopping, so it's double exposure. And these days, if we did this plot, it'd be Photoshop. And then Peter says, he's got to think fast. And in one panel, he comes up with, I think this is really funny, the argument that is ironclad to Jameson, and he immediately goes, "Oh, okay, you got me. I believe you now. You really are Peter Parker." And I'm not sure I buy that it would be this easy, especially because this was Jameson's last-ditch effort to get Spider-Man unmasked. And he goes, Peter says, well, maybe it was Harry Osborn that doctored the photos, or not doctored the photos, but that, is he saying, I guess he's saying that that's forgeries, or that he's the one who killed. No, it couldn't be that, because he actually is Peter Parker. So I guess he's saying that it's forgeries, but that it's actually. Sorry, I just needed a second to process this because I wasn't totally sure what the argument was. But that it was Harry Osborn that did the forgeries and that did the double exposure. And he goes, he was Green Goblin. He was kind of took leave of his senses, but maybe he was the one that did that. And then in the very next panel, Jameson goes, "Oh, I believe you." And I thought that there was going to be kind of a reveal where he would not actually buy it and he would be leaving with a different plan up his sleeve, but that's not at all what happens. And so then Peter tries to take it a step further and says, "Well, I think you should give me a raise because, like, you grabbed my face and you kind of shoved yourself into my apartment." And he says, "No, that's crazy. You haven't been bringing me any pictures." And then Peter suddenly looks like he's 5 years old, all happy and kicking his feet. And he goes, "Oh, everything's back to normal. Yay." And the issue sort of kind of might as well end right there. It's a little bit padded out after that. That's kind of the selling point of the issue and the reason to buy it. Jameson almost unmasks Peter as Spider-Man, but it's kind of teasing the audience too much, I think. I don't really care for that. But it makes up for it a little bit just in the fun action, and the rest of this is mostly action. I like this panel with just some bystanders looking up and going, "Isn't it cool that we live in a city that's got Spider-Man in it?" We've got to have that moment where we keep contrasting the people who are pleased that Spider-Man is out there, who believe in him and think he's doing the right thing, and then people who are skeptical of him or think that he's a nuisance, like Jameson and like the police. And so as he's swinging around, the police chase him, but interestingly, we do that entirely off panel because, as the narration says, we have too frequently lately, apparently in these issues, been showing like there's a warrant out for Spider-Man's arrest, and the cops are kind of pulling extra duty trying to catch him. And so the narration says, "We've been doing so much action lately, showing you the police chasing Spider-Man. This time we're just going to skip past all that, and here's the interesting part." And I thought that was kind of an unusual move, but I like that. It doesn't reveal anything; it's pointless, so we just skip past it because there's plenty of action here. Otherwise, Spider-Man's spider sense works in an odd way here, where he says, like, it picks up on something, and he says, "It's not warning me of danger, it's just telling me that something curious is happening." I would think that would drive you crazy. I would think that would be going off all the time. Like, how does your spider sense discern from what is relevant and is going to matter to you or move the story along narratively with just things that are not at all important and have nothing to do with you? So it ends up being, and I've seen it used this way before, but rarely, but I can't remember a time that I've seen Peter Parker come right out and say, "My spider sense is not always just about danger," where it is sometimes used as kind of a plot device in this way just to get things moving. And so there are kind of odd, and I think that it could have been danger because he's going to go into this warehouse and he's going to find danger, so it could have still been that. But there are kind of these shadowy characters in trench coats that are walking into this warehouse, so Spider-Man follows them in, and or is watching them, I should say, and then he finds one of them and grabs him and tries to intimidate him and does kind of a Batman thing, like, "I'm going to drop you if you don't tell me what I want to know." This guy is in this really weird, horribly clashing costume, orange and purple, and then Spider-Man ends up going into this warehouse and fights these guys who all look like He-Man characters, and they look like action figures, like really generic action figures with these like weird tanks with crazy missiles and things on them. And so Spider-Man has no idea what's going on in here, but it's clearly illegal. So he's fighting these guys. It's a lot of crash, bang, pow. I do think that Andrew is maybe going a little bit too often to these, again, red jagged bubbles behind Spider-Man just to say this is exciting or this is alarming, and a lot of panels without very much in the background. I don't know if this is like a more rushed issue or if that's usually the way he draws. I mean, I really like his figures. I wish sometimes there was a little bit more going on behind our characters, behind Spider-Man. I guess I lob that criticism at stuff a lot, but I seem to see this more often in the 90s than anywhere, but maybe we got it even because I've seen it a lot in Spider-Man comics specifically, and maybe we did it a lot more in the 70s and I just have not noticed it or didn't remember that. But I like the reveal of the bad guy at the end here. We're going to have a real typical end of comic villain reveal. Here's the guy who's behind whatever insanity is going on with these kind of weird purple stormtroopers, and Spider-Man assumes it must be the Kingpin. He says, the cigarette holder, that mountainous shape, there's only one man on Earth it could be, and it turns out it's not Kingpin. It is what I assume is the first appearance of Dr. Faustus, or at least Spider-Man is not familiar with this character. And I've seen him in other things. It's been a long time. I want to say Dan Slott did some stuff with Faustus, but it's been a long time since I've read his stuff, and I don't like most of that, so it hasn't stuck with me real well. But I keep saying this about things. Eventually, I'm sure I'll go back to this and read the rest of it. I mean, I want to read Amazing kind of cover to cover, finally, at least up through, the late 90s. But that's the big character reveal. So like I said, this is more or less kind of a transition comic that I probably spent a little bit too much time talking about, but it does not stand wonderfully well all by itself, because I don't really know where we've been too much before this and where exactly we're going with it. But like I said, there's some real fun action here, and I'm just amused by how hard that cover is working at making you think that this is going to be a landmark event, and it's just not. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching. Hope you enjoyed today's episode of Not Spawn Year. I'll be back again tomorrow, of course, as I'm doing every single day of the year with another single issue review from a comic from my personal collection. And in the meantime, I was Captain Logan, and happy reading.